Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story: stay away from the not deer. I don't know if anyone else in the country has seen something like it, but the area I live has a bunch of not deer. It's not something anyone around here talks about a lot, but when someone calls you in the middle of the night in hysterics or shows up on your doorstep with a wild look in their eye, you know what they saw. And they're never quite the same after they've seen it. It's hard to explain what exactly the not deer is. The name isn't very good at telling you much. You just know it when you see it. It will look like a deer, but only if you don't look closely. If you give it more than a cursory glance, then you start to see how it's not a deer at all. I've collected a few accounts my friends have had about this thing. One of my drinking buddies, who we'll call Tyler, spilled his story over some beers at our favorite little dive. Me and him were sitting with a couple of other friends in the bar. We were all a bunch of 40-something guys who had grown up in rural Appalachia. Tyler looked around the bar to see if anyone close to us was gonna hear what he said next. He told me that he saw it when he was young, in about his early 20s. Tyler was smart and had gotten into a university in a big city. He was driving back to his hometown out in the country for winter break so he could spend Christmas with his folks. He was driving a little slow down a 2-lane country road on account of the ice and snow that the area had been getting. He was keeping an eye out for animals since he was driving through the middle of the woods, so he was well prepared for if something like a deer leaped out of the woods a ways in front of his car. What not enough people understand is that hitting a deer out in the middle of nowhere can be a death sentence. They will wreck your car, and if it's a buck, then you have the extra danger of the antlers going through the windshield and into a place they're not supposed to be. So it's understandable that Tyler slammed his brakes when he saw the deer. He came to a stop about 20 feet in front of it. Tyler sat there waiting for the deer to move out of the way. He told me that at first it looked like any other normal deer, but he slowly started to realize that something was off about it. Tyler told me that the deer didn't get out of the way immediately. He said that it was wobbling on its legs like a newborn. It took a shaky step forward, then another, and then it began to walk more confidently until it was out of the way of the truck. As the deer was walking, Tyler realized that what was off about the deer was its legs. I asked him what it was about them that was off, but he just shook his head. "I don't know, man," he said. "There were either too many bends in them or not enough. It was just wrong. Wasn't made right." Tyler said that as soon as he noticed this, he got more afraid. He said it felt like his heart had sunk into his stomach. After the deer had gotten out of the car's way, it stopped in its tracks. Then its head turned around to face Tyler. "It looked too smart," Tyler said. "It wasn't looking at me, it was looking into me." Tyler put the pedal to the metal, not caring about the ice and snow on the road. He said he kept up that speed for 5 minutes. His heart was beating hard against his chest, and he had to take deep breaths to get himself to calm down. After Tyler finished his story, we were all silent. Then one of my other friends, who we'll call Jamie, spoke up. "I've never seen it," Jamie said in a voice that made me think he was lying. "But my dad has." Jamie said that it happened when he was a teen. His dad was going out to the outhouse in the middle of the night. Jamie's dad brought a flashlight with him, so he can see where he was going. He got from the house to the outhouse just fine, but when he was walking from the outhouse back to the house, he shined the flashlight into the nearby tree line. Standing just at the edge of the tree line was a deer. The deer's eyes reflected the light of the flashlight back at Jamie's dad, making it appear as though the deer's eyes were glowing. It's something that happens with all deer and all lights, but it can still be unnerving. The deer ran off after a few seconds. Jamie's dad started walking back towards the house when he heard a rustling in the trees. He shone the flashlight at the tree line again. According to Jamie's dad, there were deer standing about 5 feet apart from each other up and down the tree line. They were standing still, just looking at him. Jamie's dad got spooked and booked it back to the house. The next morning, Jamie and his dad had to drive into town for supplies. His dad told Jamie all about what happened during the drive. But Jamie said as he told the story, his dad seemed to get more unnerved, more scared. When he got to the part with all the deer standing in line, he paused. You know, something about those deer wasn't right. Besides the obvious. Jamie's dad was silent for a bit before he said it was the eyes. They didn't glow, and their faces, they were wrong. Didn't look like a deer's. What do you mean? Jamie had asked his dad. It was like someone had to make a deer's face from memory, and then you stuck it on an actual deer's body. Jamie's dad was silent for a while after that. It was only when they pulled into the store in town that Jamie's dad spoke up again. You know, Jamie, I'm starting to think what I saw weren't deer at all. Once again, our group of friends was silent. We drank our beers for a while. Then Cal spoke up. I got a story. Cal was a laid-back guy. Never really partied, never complained about his job, and was never really one to strike up the conversation. He was usually the proverbial third wheel in a group. Cal said this happened maybe 3 years ago. He ran a hardware store in town that had fallen on rough times. He decided to travel into the city to go to a business seminar being given by one of those so-called gurus to try and get his store out of the red. He was driving on a country road towards the city when the deer ran out of the woods and in front of the car. Kyle slammed the brakes and was able to stop before he hit the deer. The deer swiveled its head around to face Kyle. Kyle said, it was like Tyler said. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking into me. Kyle just sat there looking at the thing, waiting for it to get a whiff of the smell of the truck or him and run off. But instead, it walked up to the car. It raised its front legs and planted its hooves on the hood of Kyle's truck. The deer just stayed there, towering over Kyle. It looked down at him, staring at him straight into his eyes. Its breathing was real heavy and raspy, Kyle said. Sounded phlegmy too, like it was trying to couch something up. It was terrible. My heart went into my throat. I just felt like something was going to happen if I just stayed there. So I did what I had to. Kyle said he pressed down on the accelerator. The deer lost its balance and went under the truck. The truck bucked and rocked as it rolled over the deer's body. Once it was up and over, Kyle slammed the accelerator and tried to drive away as quickly as he could. As he was driving away, Kyle looked into his rear view. He could see the deer shaking, but it managed to stand back up, on its hind legs. If you're ever driving through the eastern part of the country on an isolated road, keep an eye out for these things. They're a part of the forest here, and they won't mess with you if you don't mess with them. Drive safe. Second story. There's something wrong with the deer in my yard. It's just standing in my backyard right now. See, I have a window that looks right out into it, and the weird thing isn't the deer itself. I mean, this deer is weird, but the fact that there is deer in town here isn't weird at all. I live in a small town in Montana, and recently the population of deer has basically exploded locally. They're everywhere. You can't go for a walk anymore without spotting up to 20 of the damn things, and the town is barely a mile from end to end. This thing, though, I don't know if anyone else has seen it but me, and that's terrifying. I was just browsing the internet, listening to true crime shit on YouTube while I wonder traded Pokemon, because what else does a person stuck in Podunk do but try to forget there. My cat was curled up at the foot of my bed sleeping, and I was ready for a night of bland nothingness that I was used to. It's quiet here, No traffic past 8 p.m., let alone when it's dark. So when I heard this scream, it really caught my attention. It was distorted somehow, like someone screaming through a filter or underwater, but it wasn't quiet for it. It was loud as fuck, and my cat woke up instantly and jumped off the bed with all his fur on end. I don't know where he went, to hide probably. He tore out of my room like a bat out of hell, and I just sat there in silence, half thinking that I'd somehow imagined it, despite my cat's reaction being quite contrary. Okay, let's be rational about this. Something, just screamed. Really loud. Just look out the window, right? I can't explain why, but I was terrified to look out there. The mere thought made me feel sick to my stomach. My bed is situated so that it's right in front of the window, and I felt like something was watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction to what I'd heard. But that's stupid, right? Someone could have been hurt after all. I mean, I lived in a small town. Nothing too terrible happens in this shit town. So I figured that I was just overreacting. I'm overthinking the sound. Maybe someone has fallen off their roof in the middle of the night or something. So I looked. All that was in my yard was a deer, standing off near the back fence and hunched over in a way that immediately made me uneasy, like it was hunched or crouched. Now it was dark out, so I couldn't see that well. There's a street light, but it doesn't light up my backyard well because the fence follows the line of an alleyway. So I didn't realize right away what was off about this thing. It was standing really still, and I was wondering if it also heard the sound too when it shifted very slowly forward, like it was creeping onto the edge of the house. And that's when I realized what was absolutely fucked about this thing. It wasn't on all fours. It was hunched over, so I couldn't spot it right away when it wasn't moving, but the thing was bipedal. Somehow it was walking just on its two hind legs. I can't explain it, but there was so much wrongness about the way it walked. A jerking, hilting step that drew it closer to the window. It was like it could somehow sense that I was watching it. No, not sense, it could see. Its face was turned toward me, and though it was too dark for me to see it well, I swear to God it was keeping eye contact with me. I noped out then, pulled the curtains shut, and have frantically moved my bed to the other side of the room. The doors are locked. I've double-checked, triple-checked. The windows are all shut. But God, I can't shake the feeling that this thing can somehow see me still. I've barricaded myself in my bathroom because there's no window in here. I want to get the cat, but I'm scared to step out of the room. Should I call someone? Who do I call? Freaking animal control. That thing wasn't right. I don't have a gun. I never hunted like my parents, and I'm regretting it like hell right now. I keep hearing noises around the edge of the house. Not the screams, thank God, but just this tapping, like it's trying to figure out a way to get inside. I'm terrified, but what the hell do I do? Third story. There's something wrong with the deer in my area, and I don't think it's just deer anymore. I'm from a small town in a very rural state which I will not name for privacy purposes. I studied sociology in my state university and graduated with honors. I couldn't afford any further education because I had a family to take care of, so I resorted to other jobs. It wasn't so bad. I worked every day as a handyman in my hometown. It was so small and obscure that we weren't even on the map. Population, 200 people. That said, one thing I did with my brothers was that we went hunting once the season opened up. My brothers and I still lived in town, but we would go up to the mountain and camp with our father before he passed away. We kept that tradition up since then. I was the youngest one. My brother Jack was the middle child, and Jason was the oldest one. We would go camping in the woods for a week and just drink beer, shoot around a bit, and relax. My kids would go to my parents, and my wife would take that week to relax away from the stress of kids and me. It was a nice setup that we all looked forward to. Sometimes I would bring back enough deer meat to last my entire family a month. We would also share with our closest friends and neighbors. It was the neighborly thing to do. Besides, there were always more deer in the woods. Things took a turn 2 years ago when I was diagnosed with alpha-gal syndrome, a disease that can be caused by tick bites, which makes you allergic to a sugar molecule found in most mammals. It causes me to break out into rashes, hives, itching, vomiting, and everything in between. I felt like it was some sort of cosmic joke, being forced to become a vegetarian by my own body. That said, I still went along with my brothers to join them in hunting. Although I couldn't eat the meat, I could still drink and lay back. Hey, Jake, why don't you just eat some meat? Stop being a wimp and overcome it. Jason slapped the cap off of my head while walking over to get another beer. Dumbass, you can't overcome an allergy. I'll some eat the day you learn to eat a salad. I jested back, causing Jack to roar with laughter. The first day went by smoothly. We just sat around drinking and ribbing on each other. By the third day, we began to get a bit more serious with our tracking skills. We noticed several deer tracks a bit away from our camp, and we spent a couple of hours following it until we saw it. A reddish-brown doe stood gracefully at around 3 feet tall. She was feeding on some grass, just munching away, completely unaware of how close to being another poor victim of the cruelty of the life cycle. I looked over at Jack, who had his rifle aimed at it, but before he could take a shot, Jason hollered loudly and lightly shoved Jack, causing the gun to go off. The deer snapped its head at us before quickly squirreling away back into the woods. Jason, the fuck did you do that for? Jack shoved Jason away from him, who was laughing hysterically. Yeah, man, we spent all day tracking this one down, I said, pretty irritated. Oh, relax, you guys. There was barely any meat in that doe anyways. You guys are so serious. Lighten up. Everything is a joke with you. Jack muttered while adjusting his rifle. What's that supposed to mean? Jason asked, feigning curiosity. All right, enough you two. We spent all day at this. Why don't we go back to camp and settle in for the day? I'm pretty hungry, and it's getting pretty cold. I intercepted, not wanting to cause yet another needless argument.
Fine.
Let's go. Jack agreed, and we began to walk back to our camp. I awoke the next morning to a pretty loud commotion. Jack was yelling at Jason. I rolled my eyes and opened my tent to see Jack's face was covered in slight blood, while Jason was laughing hysterically. What the fuck happened to your face? I asked, pretty concerned. This fucking asshole did dash. Jason cut Jack off by opened his tent wide open, revealing the body of a doe right next to Jack's sleeping bag. As I looked closer, I thought I could see it still twitch. I put the doe right next to Jack when he was sleeping. Oh, you should have looked at his face. The way he started screaming. Jason said in between fits of laughter. This is the last time I go camping with you. Jack angrily yelled while he stormed off with a water bottle to clean his face. I looked over at Jason and nodded my head in disappointment. Not cool, dude. What? It was just a joke? Whatever. We should probably go and start the field dressing of the doe. Already done that, he boasted while taking a sip of another canned beer. Really? I guess we should load it up on the truck and take it back to Ma's house then, I said, trying to hold in a yawn. Jack came back looking cleaner than before, and they began to haul off the deer into the direction of the truck. I stayed behind to start taking down the tents and gathering our supplies. I trailed behind my brothers, and as they loaded the body into the back of the truck, I put our supplies into my car. We began to drive back to our mother's house. Eventually, we reached our destination, and right as we pulled up, my kids came running out of the house. Tyler was the first one to reach me, his little arms reaching up for me to hold him. Hey buddy, how's it going? Where's Grandma? I asked while Tina jogged after him. Dad, Mom said I could sign up for drama camp at the end of this month. She stated firmly, "All right, we'll look at it over together later. Where's Grandma?" I asked. "I'm right here." My mother came out, standing right next to my wife as they walked on over. "Oh dear, you guys look grimy. Bring the deer to the barn, and you boys can start skinning and butchering after you shower," she stated firmly while motioning us to go into the house. I quickly kissed my wife before running into the house and quickly jumping into a shower. By the time I finished, I saw that my family was sitting around the kitchen with my brothers nowhere to be seen. "Where's Jack and Jason?" I asked while grabbing a cup of coffee. "Your brothers went to the barn to start processing the deer. They said hopefully they can finish by tonight. We can start slow cooking some venison barbecue and have it ready by morning," my wife said while taking a bite of some crackers. I leaned forward and gave her a hug, leaning my chin over her head. Tina just giggled as she continued to eat her breakfast. "How was camping?" Ma asked while taking a bite out of some bacon. "It was okay. Same old stuff," I lied with a smile, hoping to avoid any arousal. She always hated conflicts. She raised her eyebrow, but continued to eat while looking down at her phone. The rest of the day went by smoothly and my brothers worked hard to prep the deer meat, while the rest of us made random dishes here and there for tomorrow. By the time we finished cleaning and cooking, it was time to go to bed. I put my kids to bed and helped my mother clean up before going to bed with my wife. The next day, I woke up to the smell of various sizzling meats and spices wafting through the bedroom door. I got up and quickly got ready to start my day and headed downstairs. "Morning, sweetie," my wife said all cheery as she poured a cup of coffee for me. "Your entire family went over to see some neighbors that needed help or something. They said they'll be back soon. Is that so?" I raised my eyebrow while giving her a peck on the lips. "Sadly, we have to set up the entire table because a ton of people are coming over for dinner," she sighed while leaning her head onto my shoulder. I laughed it off and started helping her load all the chairs and plates for our guests. Eventually, hours went by and my family started arriving along with several people. I looked over at Jack and saw that he was rubbing his right eye before walking over to me. "Hey, you got some eye drops? I think I got pink eye," he said before being interrupted by an aunt who motioned me to go greet her. "Yeah, I think there's some in my bathroom. Go ahead and check." I dismissed him as I went off to make small talk to random people. Eventually it was time for dinner, and we all sat around as Jason started bragging about how he single-handedly caught the deer and hustled it to the truck as me and Jack slept through it all. I couldn't eye-roll anymore at his dumb story because I could feel a migraine start to form. He didn't even touch his plate, spending all of his time talking. Soon they started to dig into the venison barbecue, which looked delicious, dripping in various juices and slathered in barbecue sauce. I begrudgingly ate my potato salad and rice as everyone around me marveled about the taste of venison. The rest of the night went by smoothly, and we continued to talk and drink until it was time for my kids to go to bed. The last of the guests went home, and we cleaned up and called it a day. It was about 3 in the morning when I felt some hands on my shoulders shake me awake. "Daddy, I don't feel good," I heard the quiet whisper of Tina as she moaned in slight pain. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I said, my eyes adjusting to the dark. "It hurts." She moaned even more as she leaned her head on my chest. I reached over and turned on the light before looking down at her. Her once beautiful blue eyes were now completely bloodshot, and she had a rash all over her neck. It looked like trickles of blood were pouring slightly out of her eyes. "Jesus Christ." I pushed my hand on her little forehead, and her head wasn't just slightly warm. It felt like she was on fire. She suddenly collapsed and went limp on my arms, but I could still feel her breathing. I leaned my right arm onto my wife's shoulder and shook her. "Kristen, wake up. Kristen." She groggily awoke and looked over at us. "What's wrong?" she asked before snapping wide awake. "Oh my God, Tina. What happened to you? Baby, are you okay?" "Kristen, I gotta take her to the hospital. We gotta go now," I said rapidly while scooping up my daughter as we rushed out of the bedroom. We hurried down the stairs and into the car before driving straight onto the road. My wife pulled out her phone and pressed it against her ear. "Linda, Jack and I are on our way to the hospital right now. There's something wrong with Tina, but Tyler is in his bed. I'll let you know when we get there." I floored the gas and drove straight through the darkness of the night, counting down the minutes until we reached the hospital. We eventually spotted the lights of the town and kept driving through until we saw the hospital building up ahead. I looked over my shoulder to see my daughter holding my wife tightly. Although the engine of the car was pretty loud, I could hear the muffled giggles of Tina. I looked over at my wife, who was as equally confused as I was, but before we could even say anything, I quickly slammed on the brake before I could hit the parked ambulance in front of us. I quickly got out of my car and opened the door to my wife's side and grabbed my daughter from my wife's hands. We ran into the entrance of the hospital, running up to the only receptionist that was standing looking tired. "Please help my daughter. She passed out earlier and she has these weird rashes on her face," my wife cried out. The receptionist perked up and looked at us both before grabbing a phone and dialing it. "We have an OB code." A nurse came out of nowhere with a gurney and laid my daughter on it. Tina's entire skin was all red, and the outline of her veins were turning all black. She looked even worse than before. My beautiful little girl looked so sick that my heart was breaking. They only let my wife through the doors with Tina. The receptionist started asking me all these questions to which I had no answers for. "Sir, what happened to your daughter? What was she doing when she passed out?" "I don't know. All I know was that she woke us up and passed out, and when I turned on the light her skin looked like hell. The black veins is something new," I answered honestly. "All right. The staff is doing everything they can to assess the situation. For now, please take a seat and we'll notify you in a couple of minutes." Before I could argue back, my phone went off. I looked down to see that it was my son Tyler who was FaceTiming me. He must have noticed that we were gone. I accepted it, but the screen was all black. I could barely see the faint outline of his face. "Hey buddy, Mom and I were J-dash. Shoo, something's wrong with Grandma.
I'm scared."
He whispered quietly. My heart quickly dropped to my stomach. "Is she sick? What's wrong with Grandma?" I asked. "Listen." He got quiet and must have held out his phone, but I couldn't see anything. It looked like he was in the kitchen bathroom downstairs. I was about to say something, but the camera focused, and I could see the back of my mother's head as she sat facing away from our line of vision. She was just laughing hysterically as she cut away at something. Tyler moved the camera downward at a better angle to see what she was cutting. I took a closer look to see that she was slicing away at one of the dogs on the table. I felt the contents of my stomach jump at my throat.
"Ok, Bobby."
"Close the door and I'll be right there." "Lock it," I whispered. I ran out back into my car and quickly called Holden, the town sheriff and a close friend. He answered pretty quickly, his voice sounding all tired and annoyed. "Jake? Listen, Br-. I cut him off before he could say anything else. "Something's wrong with my mom. Holden, something ain't right at my house. I went to the hospital with Tina and Kristen, and I need you send some cops over at my house. I'm real scared, man." I blurted out. "Jake, all my guys have already been sent out. It's like the town's gone crazy tonight. I'm at the station right now, but I'll be there as soon as I can. I'll meet you there." His voice was as equally as shakily as mine was as he hung up. I must have drove 100 miles per hour because it was mere minutes before I arrived at my house. I slammed the car door and ran to the direction of my house. I wanted to go in, but I saw Jason sitting out in the front porch. Jason? What the fuck is going on? I yelled angrily that he wasn't inside looking after Tyler or my mother. He looked up at me and started laughing hysterically before crying hysterically. I've never seen Jason cry before. I think I caused this. He blubbered out. What do you mean? I asked, now fully curious. That morning I got that deer. I went for a walk in the morning, and I saw that doe acting weird. She was making this odd noise and slamming her head onto a tree. At first, I thought it was the funniest thing I ever seen. It was like the deer was laughing as she hit her head with a tree. I know they say to avoid deer that act weird, but y'all were already mad at me for ruining that shot the day before. Y'all were always mad at me. So I aimed my rifle and put her down. I thought the meat would have been cleaned out by the heat when we cooked it. When's the last time we ever got sick? I just wanted y'all to be happy with me. He cried out before shaking uncontrollably as he put his hands up to his face. I felt an anger in me like never before. That bastard put his ego before our health, and now Tina was in the hospital, and God knows what was going on with my mother. I walked up to him ready to pound at his face, but stopped the closer I got to him. He was all covered in blood. Jason, is that your blood? I asked quietly. No. He shook his head before continuing. Jack was acting all weird. I found him beheading Mama, and he started coming at me with a butcher knife. I had to stop him. I looked at him horrified before looking back at the front door. I took a few steps before walking into the house. The entire living room looked like a tornado went through it. There was Jack's body laying through what was once a glass coffee table. The entire right side of his face was covered in boils and that same rash Tina had. I looked away before running to the kitchen bathroom. Buddy, I said softly, trying not to scare him as I gently knocked on the door. The door opened with a slight squeak, and I felt Tyler's body wrap around me. Daddy, I was so scared. I heard a bunch of yelling coming from everyone. He cried out, his body shaking in my arms as he talked. I know, bud. Just close your eyes, and I'll carry you out. We're going back to the hospital to get Mommy and Tina. He merely nodded before I scooped him up. We walked over to the front of the house and started walking in the direction of the car when I started seeing the police lights of Holden's car. He pulled up near me and motioned me to enter the car. You guys okay? He quickly asked. Yeah, man, we're fine, but Dash. I wanted to explain, but he cut me off before I could say anything else. Listen, something is wrong. The military is pulling up and setting blockades around town. I had to call in the CDC earlier. Some weird outbreak about some prion disease among the local deer. It drove some people mad and made them do some scary things. I'll take you guys up to my cabin, but I gotta go see what they're doing in the hospital. He spoke as fast as he could. Kristen and Tina are there. Are they okay? Do you know anything? I quietly asked, trying not to scare Tyler. I called up Dr. Reynolds, and he said Tina showed the symptoms, but it's too early to tell with Kristen. She chose to stay with Tina while I took you two to the cabin. As soon as they're cleared, I can drive them back. The phones aren't working right because there was an accident at our only cell tower, but you can still text. I think we have Wi-Fi for now. I wanted to ask more questions, but I merely buckled in and started texting Kristen. Everything okay? Yeah, we're fine. Tina's asleep right now. You good? Yeah. Have you talked to Holden? Yeah. He said we'll meet at his cabin. Is he on his way now? No. He's still dropping us off. Text me when you see him. All right. See you in a bit. And with that, I felt slightly relieved. I was going to wait in person to tell her about my mother, Jack, and Jason. Eventually, we reached his cabin, and I took Tyler up to a spare bedroom as Holden drove off. I'm growing restless at not being able to do anything, but I have Tyler to look after right now. Do you think we'll be all right? Fourth story. The Knot Deer of Pulaski County. I suppose, due to the nature of this page, a lot of you have heard of a knot deer. For those of you who haven't, I pray you never find out firsthand. Oh, where are my manners? My name is Madison. I'm almost 25 years old, and I've lived in a tiny village called Ulin, pronounced Uhlin, for about 2 years now. Shortly after moving here, I encountered one of these creatures said to only roam the Appalachian states. I know, it was after dark, and you're going to ask if I'd been drinking or anything. Or you're going to say that my eyes were playing tricks on me with a deer and some shadows. First of all, I was stone cold sober that night, as I don't drink, save for once every other blue moon. Secondly, this thing was standing directly under a streetlight. I can't be losing my mind, right? Right? Pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Allow me to start from the top. It was a stagnant, humid August evening in tiny Podunk Ulin, not Uhlin. The sun had recently set, and the stars had just started to wink to life in the gradient canvas of navy blue, purple, and black overhead. So I'd probably set it at about 9 to 9:15 in the evening. Things were fairly quiet, as they usually are in this little town. A dog barking in the distance, and the occasional whisper of a car going down the main road about a block and a half from my house. I live with my wonderful fiancé, we'll call him Kevin, as I'm not sure he'd want his identity known, and his name isn't really relevant to the occurrence. Directly across the street from a lovely, small baseball park. I used to love going for evening walks through this little park, until that night. I finished letting our 2 dogs outside for a run and potty before their bedtime and fed our deaf cat, Lance. Then I grabbed up my double-decker cheeseburger-shaped coffee mug/pipe, baggie of weed. Yes, I do smoke pot regularly, but don't jump to any conclusions yet, and Lucky Bic lighter, which is red with a picture of Morty Smith from Rick and Morty printed on it. And after telling my fur kids that I loved them and would return shortly, stepped out into the soupy night air. It was so warm I half considered staying inside where it was more comfortable. But I'd had a long day at work at the local dollar store, and definitely needed to get some mano-y-mano with the cool grass and my favorite smoking piece. Maybe that'd be mano-y-mano-y-mano? I dunno. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes. I was crossing the street to hop over the ditch and onto the side of the park, when I heard the strangest, most terrifying sound, something straight out of a nightmare. The best way I could describe it would be like the cry of some kind of animal giving birth, but the sound was so wet and gargled, as though the laboring beast's throat were slit. I was mid-jump when this horrendous, nightmare-fueling wail, and it scared me so badly that I tried to stop in midair, succeeded, only to fall into the ditch, probably 3 or 4 feet deep, not including the extra 8 to 10 inches of height I'd had over said ditch. Pain exploded up my leg, blooming from my ankle in a sensation I know all too well as a sprain, me being a klutz and all. I let out a cry of my own, grabbing my already swelling ankle and rushing to tighten my high-top shoe with a stick pushed down on either side as a makeshift splint until I could hobble back across the street. After making the impromptu support for my injured foot, I finally looked around for the source of what had given me such a fright. That's when I saw it, standing directly under a street light alongside a paved road leading through the park, ears perked and gaze trained directly on me. The creature was bigger than any deer I'd ever seen, even dwarfing me in its horrible stature. I'm no small woman by any means, standing at 6 foot tall and about 270 to 300 pounds. But this I don't know, animal? It had to be all of my height, just at the shoulder, and the rack atop his head was a sight to behold in and of itself, or probably would have been, had it not been so badly battered, and in some parts completely snapped off at the end. At one point, I would have wagered that the beast was at least 24 to 26 points. He would have smashed the record for Trophy Buck, which is currently 22 points, for those who are curious. The moment I could tear my gaze away from the monstrous, darkly stained antlers crowning the beast is the moment I really noticed that something was terribly, terribly wrong with the creature. Its fur was filthy and matted with what I can only hope wasn't the same deep crimson stuff staining its antlers, but due to how some patches of its body gleamed as though encrusted with liquefied rubies under the overhead light, my hopes are probably in vain. Yes, several chunks of its skin were completely gone, exposed flesh wriggling with plump, white little bodies that would occasionally fall away onto the paved road below. This creature was beyond sickly. He looked all but zombified. His skin barely hung on his bones, and his legs were just bent all wrong. This could have been a malformed deer that had just been abandoned young and gotten deathly ill, but I can't express enough to you all the sheer size of this thing. The bottom of its chin would easily come over the top of a brand new, big pickup truck like a dually or something. It couldn't be any smaller than a fully grown moose, I swear to you. Despite its horribly emaciated, even rotted state, it was massive, and it was beyond imposing. But the most horrifying part of all about this creature is the eyes or eye. One had obviously been gouged out at some point, replaced by a puckered, inflamed mass of blood, pus, and more maggots, but the other one held enough malice, pure, unmistakable disgust and outrage at my very existence, for the both of them. I was completely frozen for what felt like just a moment, terrified beyond screaming at the sight of an almost skinless deer skull snarling with rage at me atop such a grotesquely huge body. The lack of visible muscle framing the creature gave me no illusions to the level of its strength. Somehow I just know that if the thing wants me dead, I'll be dead. But finally the creature gave me what I can only call a nod of its disgusting, antlered head, then turned away and sauntered off towards the neighboring strip of woods. I swear it felt like I was only there for about a minute or two, but when I could finally move, blink, breathe, the eastern skies were starting to lighten. I had several missed calls and voicemails from a worried future fiancé, and numerous texts as well, all wondering where I was and why I hadn't come to bed. I rushed back home across the street and wrapped up my ankle to stave off the swelling, topped off with the occasional ice pack, but I couldn't sleep for days after what I'd seen, felt, and experienced. I was getting paranoid, jumpy, and my partner, godsend that he is, started to worry. I finally tried to tell him about what happened and what I'd experienced, but predictably he thought I'd just been tripping balls. However, noticed that I hadn't even reached the park before this happened. I never got to light up. I was not under any influence when I'd seen the beast, not even when I'd lost almost 8 hours of time. Why am I telling you all this now, after almost 2 years of silence? Well, the past 3 nights, I've been hearing wet, guttural snorts and these terrible, snapping scrape sounds out by the tree in the front yard. And the heavy hoof sounds that precede and succeed those noises are more befitting those of a horse, or maybe a moose, rather than any deer. I'm beginning to wonder if the beast from across the street hadn't changed his mind about letting me survive witnessing his terrible majesty. 5th story. When the trees start waving, run. Our travel agent was right. The views in Canada's Northwest Territories were worth the hike. Becky, Rob, Sophie, and I followed a touristy path all the way up to Nahani National Park Reserve, But after that, we decided to make a detour downriver. The route was given to us by a Canadian couple we met at a hostel just outside of Uranium City. They promised us we'd be the only people to see the remote trail in 100 years. If I'd known then where they were sending us, I'd have killed them both on the spot with my bare hands. Everything was fine this morning. We woke up and started buzzing about the camp like usual. Becky got a fire going while Rob started the coffee. Sophie and I took down our tent, then Becky and Rob's. We were all finished breakfast and ready to hit the trail 30 minutes after sunrise. Even in early summer, it can get cold in the Northwest Territories. The four of us were fine, though well-provisioned and prepared and experienced. The terrain in the Nahani National Park was stunning. Massive red oak and paper birch stretched out into the sky, threatening to comb the clouds. Their roots often wove together through the dirt trails, hard tangles that tested our boots and our focus. The Nahani River ran fast and quiet to the west, the wide water humming with life. There are places where the river dives over rocks. You can hear the falls approaching from far away through the summer silence. We followed the Nahani into the deep valley that split a sharp, blue-white mountain ridge. The Nahani Valley has an off-putting nickname, the Valley of the Headless Men, but we weren't planning on spending too much time down in the cut. Our local guides had drawn us a map that would supposedly lead us to a remote secondary valley nestled between Nahani and a neighboring mountain. It was a small but beautiful place full of ice-fed streams and trout and lodgepole pines and soft green fields. Or so the couple in Uranium City told us. It took us most of the morning to find the start of the hidden path that led out from the valley. Rob was the first to notice the trampled brush that marked the start of the side trail. The big guy jumped up like a little kid and let out a whoop. "Over here, Jimmy," he shouted at me. "I think I found the yellow brick road." Becky giggled and hurried over. Where Rob was a bear of a man. His wife barely broke 5 feet even in boots. Sophie and I walked towards the trail together. The weather was fine and clear, but growing colder in the shadow of the valley. Rob took point leading us up the trail, his long oak walking stick thumping in time to whatever tuneless song he was humming. The path was narrow enough that we had to walk single file. Becky went next, snapping pictures every few minutes as we climbed towards the top of the valley. Finally, Sophie then I brought up the rear. The temperature continued to drop like a stone in a well as we walked. Long afternoon shadows stretched over and across us, clouds thickening in the sapphire sky until they were so gray and low we could almost reach up to run our fingers through the fibers. We hiked on for about an hour before the strangeness started. Becky and Sophie were debating the best way to build a fire when Sophie stopped in her tracks. "We've passed that tree before," she said, pointing off trail at a lightning-scarred oak. The four of us stood still for a moment. The wind was picking up again, causing the trees on either side of the trail to bend. "That tree does look familiar," I said. The oak was maybe 30 feet tall, bare-branched, and scorched in a line down the trunk. I don't think so," Rob said. "We've been climbing in pretty much a straight line. There's no way we looped around. The lightning scar, though," Sophie murmured. "Lots of trees out here probably get hit during storms," Becky said. "Let's keep going. I bet we'll be over the nearest ridge in an hour, and then we can rest." We passed the lightning-struck oak twice more over the next 3 hours. The first time, Rob tried to laugh it off, saying we must be walking through the forest of lightning-loving trees. But the next time we came up on the oak, nobody was laughing. Becky went to examine the tree, confirming that it had the mark she'd scratched into it with her knife on the previous passing. "I don't understand," she said. "I checked the compass. We're constantly going west. How did we loop back in a circle?" You think that couple back in town sent us down some kind of trick path? Robbie asked. I pulled my collar tighter. The cold was almost a physical force by that point, drilling into every exposed slice of skin. Even worse was the constant wind. Trees ebbed and flowed with each gust. It was almost like they were waving. We should head back, I suggested. If we just retrace our steps, we'll exit out into the Nahani Valley. Sophie looked up at the clouds, searching for the sun. It'll be dark by the time we get down. We'll need to camp in the valley. Lovely, muttered Rob. But yeah, not many other options. Throw it in reverse. We're following you, Jimmy. I nodded and took a sip from my water pack. Then I set off, heading back the way we came down the path. It didn't make any sense. Once we turned around to head back towards the Nahani River, we stopped passing the lightning tree. Instead, we began moving in a loop, passing the same unfamiliar terrain over and over every 15 or 20 minutes. It went like clockwork. The trail would dip, we'd walk by a pair of intertwined trees I didn't remember passing on the way up, then a barren patch with no vegetation, then a small pond that absolutely was not there the first time we climbed the path. What in the hell is going on? Becky asked, the tint of panic nipping at her words. She made us stop every 200 yards so she could check her compass. I watched the dial spin slowly, moving clockwise even though we were standing still. We must have gone off the trail at some point, Rob said, shaking his own compass. And maybe we're standing over some iron deposits or something that would mess with, magnetic fields. Sophie was crouched looking at the cold dirt. We've literally been following our own tracks back towards the valley. We're still on the path. We can't be, Becky snapped. We can't be. She finished in a whisper. I understood how she was feeling. My own grip on reality was starting to fray. The trees around us were even beginning to look unnatural. They bent almost in half whenever the freezing gusts came through, then fell back, their branches following in a sharp, wooden wake. Cloud cover had dropped to combine with a rising fog, leaving the whole forest in a thick mist that seemed to be closing in on the trail. I'm tired, Becky said suddenly. Guys, I'm exhausted. Can we rest? Sophie and I shared a look, but Rob was already sliding off his pack. Let's take 15 and just catch our breath, he said. Sophie licked her cracked lips. It's going to be dark in maybe 2 hours. We should either keep moving or find a spot to camp. No flatland anywhere I can see, I said. Just this nasty ridge, heavy trees, that lake. We shouldn't camp by the lake, Becky said. She was sitting on her pack. There's something about the water, something wrong. Can't you smell it? I shook my head and she sighed. Just give me a few minutes to rest, and we can push on. Either we'll find the exit to the valley, or maybe a good spot for the tents. Sophie and I looked around while Becky and Rob rested. We were tired too, but some feeling, made me wary of taking a break. The fog was heavy and cold. Just walking through it seemed to drain the little energy and heat I had left. Have you tried calling for help? Sophie asked me when we were a few steps off the trail, but still inside of the others. I nodded. 3 times now. I can't get any signal. We're going to have to find somewhere to camp soon, or we're going to freeze, Jimmy. I know. This wind. The trees were snapping back and forth faster now. At first, it was like they were waving a greeting, but now it felt like they were frantic. When Sophie and I got back on the path, it took us nearly a minute to shake Becky and Rob awake. Both had fallen asleep sitting on their packs. We can't stay here, Sophie said. I think we should go off the path and set up camp as soon as we hit any suitable space. The moment we left the trail, the ground turned on us. It was like walking through mud, even though the dirt was frozen stiff. The earth pulled at our boots, tripped us, seemed unwilling to let go each time we tried to take a step. We trudged through dense, misty forest. Even the branches and roots seemed to pull at us, to hold us. The four of us were all leaning against walking sticks when we reached the narrow creek. "I can't go any farther," Becky said, slumping down.
I'm sorry.
"I just can't." Sophie helped her remove her pack. "It's okay. Here is probably as good a spot as any for the tents." I noticed that both girls had something wrong with their skin. It was cracked and gray, their faces rough as new leather. When I looked at Rob, I saw he had the same condition. I pulled my gloves off and noticed that my skin was also turning gray and brittle. "We need to set up the tents," I said. The wind made it nearly impossible to roll out the fabric, and the frozen ground resisted the tent spikes. Sophie and I managed to make slow, brutal progress, but when I looked over at Rob and Becky in their nook between two trees, I saw they had stopped working. The couple sat together, holding each other, both asleep. Strangely, their skin was completely gray at this point, and their legs appeared to sink into the earth. A trick of the fog, I guessed. Sophie noticed where I was looking and moved to help our friends. "Wait," I said, struggling to breathe. "We need to finish the tent first, then help." Sophie bit her lip but nodded. Somehow we assembled the tent and both crawled inside. It was warmer inside, though the wind ripped and tore at our little nylon fortress. "I'm so tired," Sophie told me, leaning against my shoulder. "I'm so tired." Her skin was like Rob's and Becky's. I saw that she'd pulled off her gloves, and all of her fingers were merging together. Hey, stay awake," I begged, shaking Sophie. "We can't sleep." "Something terrible is Sophie? Sophie?" It was no good. Nothing I did could get my wife to open her eyes. Her body was stiff and hard and cold. I lay there holding her for a long time. Why I had the energy to keep going that small bit extra, I'll never know. Eventually, after Sophie stopped breathing, I opened the tent flap to look out. It was difficult to see more than a few feet through the fog, but I saw enough of what remained of Rob and Becky to scream. Where my two friends should have been, a pair of entwined birch trees rose from the ground. Both trees still had human features in the knots and whorls, though sleeping faces complete with bits of clothes here and there. I closed the tent and fell back. I looked at Sophie. She was changing fast. Her skin was becoming like bark, her body stretching, neck elongating, legs pressing through the tent floor into the dirt. "Sophie?" I asked. The ruins of my wife did not answer. I'm watching her now, minute by minute, become less human, more of the forest. I feel the change happening to me, too. My joints are growing stiff, so I'm writing all of this down as quickly as I can. Once I'm done, I'll place my journal in a waterproof bag and drop it in the creek. Hopefully, the water will flow down into the Nahani River, and someone will find this last account of mine, of us. If you're reading this, I know you won't believe it. I wouldn't either, not before today. But it is the truth. Robert and Rebecca Astros. Sophie and James Harden. When people come to search for us, they won't find any bodies. Just 4 birch trees growing up through the tatters of a campsite. In the end, there wasn't any pain, at least. I'm going to drop this book in the creek, then I'm going to return. I'm going to hold Sophie close, and then I'm going to sleep. If you're ever exploring the Nahani Valley, don't take any unmarked paths. Please, when you see the trees waving in the wind, know that it's not a greeting. It's a warning. So I found this journal in a thrift store in Toronto. It looks like it's really been through the ringer. Can anyone verify if there are any known dangers around the Nahani Valley? Google makes it sound like the place is creepy AF, but I'd love to hear from a local or someone who has visited the area. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.